Knowledge, what is that? A guided discussion on epistemology. Next, on Atheist Viewpoint. Hello and welcome to Atheist Viewpoint. I'm your host, Dennis Horvitz. With me today is Dave Muscato, who is our Director of Public Relations, and we are going to preview another one of what is actually in a series of online workshops of material and subjects that are pertinent to atheism and free thought. As I said in the beginning, the title of this particular workshop is Knowledge, what's that? A guided discussion on epistemology. So Dave, thanks for joining me.
Yep, happy to be here.
What is the background? I mean, the background source that you're using for this workshop.
So this workshop is loosely based on the chapter on epistemology and what we can know from this book, The Big Questions by Nils Rauhut. And what I really like about this book is that it breaks down the big things that people talk about in philosophy as far as, you know, how we ought to act and the limits of our knowledge and free will and all sorts of things like that in really a readable way. It's not dense at all. It has these wonderful little sidebar sections called Food for Thought, discussion questions at the end of each chapter, slices sorted if you want to go and read it in more detail. But what I really like is that each chapter is totally independent of every other one.
Right.
So if you just are curious about whether God exists or not, you want to talk about the basic arguments for and against that, you can just skip to that chapter. You don't have to read it cover to cover if you're just interested in something specific.
Right. A lot of stuff that I've read, I guess, is necessarily dealing with philosophy is necessarily dense.
And philosophy can be dense. And one of the things that I don't like about often the way that it's taught is they kind of mix the history of philosophy in with the practice of doing philosophy. And it's important to know who the great thinkers are and what they contributed to the field. But, I mean, history of it is not the same thing as asking these questions and exploring the answers.
Right. It's like the history of science is not the same as science. Or even the philosophy of science is not the same as empirical practice of science.
Right.
So, but before we go any further, why don't you define epistemology?
Sure. So epistemology, it's one of the subfields of philosophy, and basically what it explores is the limits of knowledge, the scope of knowledge, as far as what we can know, how we can say that we know something versus just that we believe something, as far as justification for knowledge, what counts as justification, what doesn't count, how we can understand the difference between what counts as justification or not, and those types of questions. Right.
Now, in your presentation, which by the time everyone sees this will be available online. There's several segments there, and in some cases you have schematics set up. And among those, I guess one of the first ones is the differences among myth, religion, and philosophy. Yeah.
So there are three pretty distinct concepts that sometimes, we talk about like Christian myth and stuff like that, and there are myths within Christianity, but they're not synonymous. So a myth is really just they usually start as oral, stories that are passed down from generation to generation, and they attempt to explain some of the things about why the world is the way that it is, the big questions, as far as how we got here, how the universe started, why there are stars in the sky, all those types of things, and every culture has their own myths.
Right, but I guess part of the purpose of your workshop is so that atheists who are in this discussion don't put their foot in it by saying, "Oh, it's all a big myth," because that would be wrong.
Well, I guess it just depends on what you mean by it's all a big myth.
Right.
I mean, the difference really between myth and religion is that with myth, you're not really provided with any reason to believe that it's true or not. It purports to be true for the people who follow it, but the difference with religion is that there's some kind of revelation as a backing for why you should believe it. Like, for example, there's a book that says, God inspired the writers, and that's how we can trust that this is true. Or, our ancestors were gods, and we got these stories passed down from them, and that's how we know that they're true, or something like that. It just depends on the culture. And then philosophy is distinct from those two in that myth is, the stories themselves. Religion is, among other things, the myths plus the revelation that is a backing for why you should believe it. And then philosophy is really a different way of exploring those types of big questions using things like logic and evidence as opposed to just divine revelation.
Let me refer to something that was really close to home. Not too long ago, Dave Silverman was appearing on the Bill O'Reilly show regarding the quote-unquote war on Christmas, and O'Reilly said that Christianity isn't a religion, it's a philosophy. How would you respond to that?
He's wrong. Christianity
really?
is a religion.
What a surprise.
There are many definitions of religion. It's not universally agreed upon by lexicographers and cultural anthropologists and religious studies professors and the people who study this thing. But religion, I think, necessarily includes supernatural elements. Right. It necessarily includes rituals and things like that. And I think a good way to put it is the way Justice Potter Stewart put it when he was talking about pornography, but he said, you know it when you see it.
Right.
And Christianity is a religion. It has philosophical aspects of it, but I mean, my response, I guess, would be if we want to consider Christianity a philosophy, then it shouldn't get any more tax breaks.
Right. There's also because when we were talking about this the other day, there's also a difference between myths and legends.
Yeah, so they're conflated terms, and there's not everybody agrees on these types of differences, but legends don't necessarily include a supernatural element. They're just kind of stories that are passed around. Things like we were talking the other day about, like the Loch Ness Monster. There's nothing supernatural about that. It's just an animal, your purported animal. But when you start talking about things, like a winged horse or something that's physically impossible, any animal that size, the wingspan would be far too large and to fly, and that's getting into religious territory when you start talking about that.
Right, and a legend doesn't necessarily purport to have any. What's the word I'm looking for? Well, it doesn't necessarily purport to teach a lesson. There's nothing necessarily edifying about the Loch Ness Monster.
Not necessarily. I mean, some legends do have moral lessons, like King Arthur and things like that. But myths are much more closely tied to supernatural elements, I think, is where I would draw the main distinction.
So basically, the workshop itself outlines the way in which we look at the world, in which we have knowledge. What we know is knowledge. So what are the different branches of philosophy, for instance?
Okay, there's this is disputed, but this is talked about in the book also. But basically, there are 5 branches to philosophy. There's logic, which looks at arguments, premises and conclusions and fallacies and that sort of thing. There's epistemology, which is what this workshop is about, questions about the scope and nature of knowledge itself. There's metaphysics, which are questions about ultimate reality as far as things, questions about, do angels exist, do colors exist, those types of questions. Metaphysics is largely within the purview of science nowadays, as far as, the electromagnetic spectrum explains colors and that kind of thing. There's ethics, which is how we ought to behave.
Yes.
And then there's aesthetics, which also is kind of not something a lot of people are focused on these days. But it was very, very important to some of the founders of philosophy, talking about things like architecture, the golden ratio, and those kinds of things. Aesthetics deals with what counts as beauty and how we can know what's beautiful, and whether beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and those types of questions.
More or less how we feel about reality.
Yeah.
Would you say? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's expressed in forms of art or all kinds of
music,
poetry, and music, and that kind of thing. What kind of questions, just generally, do you usually get from people that are fallacious, misconceptions about the differences between amongst myths and religion and philosophy?
Well, it's mostly just people having kind of a misunderstanding of what they are. Philosophy kind of came about as a way to look at things objectively and have a more consistent standard for how we approach what we're talking about. The problems with religion are that what you're claiming is true varies from culture to culture. And with philosophy, it doesn't really work like that. If you're applying logic and reasoning and evidence, you're going to get the same answers or close to the same answers regardless of which culture you're in, which is what makes science so useful, and how we think, the reason rather that we trust science so universally as a real tool for understanding how the universe is, as opposed to religion, which is completely dependent on geography and things like that don't seem to have any logical connection to what's actually true or not.
Right. I'm one of our guests, our upcoming guest is Massimo Pigliucci, who's been on here before, and he and a friend of his, one of his colleagues, Martin Baudry, actually put together a book, edited a series of articles in a book called The Science of the Philosophy of Pseudoscience, reconsidering the demarcation problem as what constitutes science versus as opposed to pseudoscience. And one of the things that in one of the articles they were talking about, that it's very easy to say, for instance, that take a position, for instance, that science doesn't address the supernatural. Well, first of all, it says that science does not depend on supernatural explanations, and nor is it in a position to delineate or remark about the supernatural. It's just not in that purview. And one of the problems at this particular, I think it was Baudry that said, one of the problems with this is, while that may be true, it doesn't do anything to, it kind of relegates pseudoscience and illogical thinking, wishful thinking, if you will, into its own, as almost kind of a legitimate position in and of itself.
Yeah, that's kind of the Stephen Jay Gould non-overlapping magisterium.
Right, I thought of it, right.
Mm-hmm. And no, that's absolutely false. So many claims about supernatural things conflict overtly with the study of science. So when you're talking about the supernatural claim about the diversity of life on Earth, for example, saying that God created all these different things, that overtly conflicts with what we know about evolution and speciation. And
right,
so on,
as I've read, and I think Dawkins and a few other people have addressed this, maybe Hitchens, that magisteria, as Stephen Jay Gould said, in fact does overlap, because religion makes existential claims that are falsifiable.
Right, and really, I mean, this is the God of the gaps thing. Every time so far we've had something that we attributed, not we, but that societies have attributed to a supernatural creator type entity, and we've taken the scientific process and applied it to that and found out that no, there actually is a perfectly reasonable scientific natural explanation for how these things happen. We found out that it's not a God that did it. And I don't think there's any really good reason to think that that is going to end anytime soon. And just because there are some questions that we haven't yet answered but are working on doesn't mean that a God did it. And that's just an argument from ignorance.
From ignorance. Going back to knowledge, because you covered the branches of philosophy, but epistemology, as you said, deals with the origin, nature, and limits of knowledge. What was there was a term used, I think you used propositional knowledge.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So, well, I mean, there are different ways that we use the word to know in the English language. For example, I know you. We're coworkers, but that's not really the kind of knowledge that we're talking about. A synonym might be I'm acquainted with you, which is not the limits of knowledge.
Right.
If you say like I know how to ride a bike, you can know all sorts. I mean, you can have a PhD in physics and understand everything there is to know about momentum and gravity and so on. That doesn't mean that you know how to ride a bike.
Right.
And similarly, you can know how to ride a bike and not know a thing about the mathematics of physics, and they're separate ways to approach it. But both of those are not really related to what epistemology deals with as a philosophy. Epistemology talks about what's called propositional knowledge, which is knowledge that rather than knowledge how. When you're saying that I know that my parents are this person and this person, and how do I know that? How do I justify that belief? Is my belief justified enough to say that it counts as knowledge, and those kinds of questions.
And you also cover the difference between knowledge and belief.
Right, and this is something when you're discussing religion, with a religious person, this is something that comes up a lot.
Right.
Religious people especially tend to conflate knowledge and belief, and they use them interchangeably. They're very, very different things.
And we can get this in a few minutes, but also between faith and belief.
Right.
But let's deal with knowledge and belief first.
So belief is a necessary condition of knowledge. You have to believe something in order to say that you know it. But it's not a sufficient condition of knowledge. Just believing something doesn't make it something that you know. It also has to be something that you can justify. That is, you have to be able to provide some argument for why you think it's true. And it has to, in fact, be true out there in the universe. Right. Even if you believe something and you can justify why you believe it, doesn't mean that it's actually true or that it counts as knowledge.
Before we go on, I just want to like to delineate what we mean by the difference of necessary and sufficient. Oxygen is necessary for life, but it's not sufficient for you. Need,
right. Yeah. It's just
things.
These are just terms in logic.
Okay, I guess I just want to so because some of these terms that and of course which you very adequately, nicely illustrate in your workshop, as you say, are easily conflated and misunderstood. Yeah, so knowledge and belief are often conflated, but faith and the term belief and faith are also conflated. In my experience, almost more so than knowledge and belief. Give you an example. I was having a discussion years and years ago at a tabling, and this woman was talking to me, and she said, "Well, you tried to convince me as an atheist that I had faith," and she said, "Well, you have faith that the subway will arrive." And no, that's a reasonable certainty, or a reasonable surety, or based on past experiences, and based on the fact that I know that subways exist, the tracks exist, and I have taken the subway before, and am likely to again.
Right.
But, so that's not real faith.
No,
I don't have faith in my doctor. I have a reasonable certainty that he or she knows what they're talking about and will do the right thing.
Right, and that's just a misunderstanding of the definition of the word faith.
Right.
There is a biblical definition in Hebrews of what faith is. It's I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. It's I think in 11:1 or something. It says trust in things not seen or something like that.
Yes.
No, faith is the dictionary definition is firm or unwavering belief. Despite the lack of sufficient evidence or despite evidence to the contrary.
To the contrary.
That's very different from what we're talking about with a subway or a doctor would be confidence.
Yes.
Is the term in statistics that you use. And confidence is based on things like past experience, which would be repeated experiment to use the term from science there. The sample size that you're working with, whether those experiences are shared. all sorts of things like that that add up to a good convincing case for why you can trust this. Very different from faith, which is basically just saying that you believe it, and therefore that's justification that it's true, which is not the case.
Right. I told her that I believe the subway will come based on past experience, but faith would be going to the back of a cave on one of the moons of Jupiter and standing there for the rest of your life, absolutely certain that the subway is going to come. Mm-hmm. Would that be a good example?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have a good reason for believing something, or you don't have any justifiable reason aside from your belief, then you're talking about faith, not confidence.
And one of the things that you cover in your workshop in regards to knowledge is the justification.
Yeah, justification is extremely important to the study of epistemology, and really what I'm hoping people get out of the workshop when they watch it is just that your level of confidence in a proposition should depend greatly on your justification. This is something that religious people, in my experience, have kind of a problem with understanding and applying, is that if your justification is faith, that's not a good justification. Even if your justification is evidence, like a lot of times you'll hear religious people say that they had some experience, an angel visited them or a dead relative or something, and that convinces them.
And they know it.
That is an empirical claim. I mean, that is an evidence-based claim, but it's just such a weak one that your level of confidence based on that should be accordingly low.
Well, yeah, and I think the problem too is that not only is faith considered a branch of knowledge, but it's considered virtuous.
According to religious people, I don't consider it a branch of knowledge.
But I'm talking, I'm talking generally. That if we're, I'm trying to think of an example, but it's not only it's considered virtuous, and in fact, I can't remember. Maybe you would know. There was some Christian theologian hundreds and hundreds of years ago who said. It's because it's ridiculous that I believe.
Yeah, who was that? It started with a T. I don't remember his name, but yeah, it's the phrase that, like you said, because it's ridiculous, I believe. And somebody later made a joke about it and said, because it's ridiculous, I don't believe, which is really the way it ought to be.
Right. I mean that is true. Anything to say that kind of just we want to encourage everybody to go to will be on YouTube.
It'll be on YouTube, on our YouTube channel.
And it's just again, it's one of a series of workshops. How many workshops are you going to be doing actually?
We're probably going to be doing them once a month. This will be our second one, and people seem to like them, and we're going to keep it going.
And it's kind of an open discussion. They actually can ask you questions online. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, by the time this airs, it will have finished. But yes, the way that the workshops are set up, they're through Google Hangouts Live on YouTube, and people can tweet to us their questions at American Atheist or on our Facebook page, and we address them during the broadcast.
Can you give us a rough idea of what you have down the line coming up?
Yeah, at some point we're going to be doing one on the historical reliability, or rather the lack of it, of the New Testament. I'm not sure what else we have coming, but some interesting topics.
Okay, but in any case, we have come to the end of another episode of Atheist Viewpoint, and we hope we have enticed you to participate in these workshops. Thank you, Dave Muscato.
Yeah.
Once again, this workshop is entitled Knowledge, What is That? A Guided Discussion of Epistemology. You have been watching Atheist Viewpoint, where reason reigns and reality rules. See you next week.
Knock, knock, and the sound from my door, a youth with a message from the Lord. Jesus loves you, yes I'm sure, but I'm not born anymore. You're trying to save my soul with your washed out eyes, offering me real estate up in the skies. Don't be offended by a word to the wise, but I'm not falling anymore. I've read your read it well. I've heard all the stories the preachers tell. What kind of sadist would create a hell? I'm not falling anymore. Can't you get free from the jail inside? You sold your own mind for a place to hide. Break your slave chains and cast them aside. Freedom's knocking at your door. Bellies go empty while your coffers fill. Our land is bleeding and the wounds won't heal, and I'm not falling anymore. You quit burning witches long ago. The Inquisition is over, I know. The Pope's even pardoned Galileo, but I'm not falling anymore. Can't you get free from the jail inside? You sold your own mind for a place to hide. Break your slave chains and cast them aside. Freedom's knocking at your door. The look on your face shows a withered brain. Religion has driven you insane. Some want money, you want pain, but I'm not falling anymore. You ask if I'm happy, yes I am. I think for myself, I've learned to stand. Kneel if you want, I don't give a damn, but I'm not praying anymore. Can't you get free from the jail inside? You sold your own mind for a place to hide. Break your slave chains and cast them aside. Freedom's knocking at your door. I wish I could free you from your cell. You disdain life and you're scared of hell. They've indoctrinated you quite well, but we're not falling anymore.